My name is Steve Zeltzer. I'm with WorkWeek Radio. We have been covering the struggle in South Africa between the struggle of the strikes, the Clover strike, and Namibian workers, the strikes there and the firing of militants there. And we want to develop international solidarity, and we cover labor struggles all over the world. There is going to be an international commemoration of the 1973 uprising in South Africa in January 26th through the 29th. And it's going to be bringing workers from South Africa the lessons of that struggle and the fight today against privatization, contracting out, and for workers to have their own political party, a workers' party, as well as for workers developing a labor media channel in Southern Africa and internationally. We need to have a organized labor communication that brings workers together globally. David Hempson, who is one of the organizers of the COSATU and Durban Dockers, and then we'll have Brother Joseph Dube give his report on what's going on and some of the other trade unions. So,
you know, we are trying to, Steve and I, and I think all of us are trying to work together to build a network among dock workers, which is really going to be effective. Right now, I've been just chatting before we started to record, together with Joseph Dube, who's the General Secretary of RETUSA, which is organizing dock workers in Durban and nationally organizing transport workers. And we were exchanging about the marvelous victory of Liverpool workers in getting 14.3 as a basic wage increase, and I think 18.5% for some. And this shows what's possible in struggle. And we do need to get together and organize our wage struggles in coordination, give an international solidarity so that when one group of workers are struggling in one port, others will also put the pressure on, as we've had in the marvelous solidarity move from the ILWU, that's the West Coast of America during the apartheid era. They really put the squeeze on apartheid South Africa, and also helped us enormously in the labor movement because we knew we had labor movement active on internationally on our behalf. So there's that. And then as well, we want to then hone ideas, improve ideas of how to resist privatization, which is being foisted on us in every possible way, sometimes in our face, sometimes behind our backs. But when we suddenly find that, you know, we are now dealing with a private corporation where previously it was under some form of public ownership. Not ideal, but at least it was public. And then finally, I think we want to discuss the question of how workers actually express themselves politically. You know, the problem is that where we have had public ownership, we found that that is not, it's been based on a capitalist principle. In other words, profitability is a rule, and really often very harsh regimes of labor, rather than really a deep education of workers, a confirmation that workers will be getting full-time employment, and that they're not to be treated as you know, picked up and then thrown out every day, disgorged and struggling to maintain themselves and their life. So we, you know, those are some of the things we'd like to do. And then just to end with reinforcing the point that Steve made, I know that Durban might seem far away, although can I say Durban is a very welcoming city. It's my hometown. I won't say more about my side of it, but anyway, I know that Joseph Dube, who you'll see there, Sianda, who you see, whose name is up there, although he's in Joburg, but I'm sure you can make the trip down to Durban, will be there welcoming workers. I'll be there welcoming workers, and we would like to get workers together to commemorate the mass strikes that we had, and then to sit down in sessions and see how we can improve the coordination in our struggles and in our organization from Oakland to Liverpool to Barcelona and to Durban, Cape Town, everywhere that we can think of. So that's all I wanted to say, except that, you know, we really do welcome every contact that we can make. We'll keep up a living link with each other right up to January, and then of course in Durban and then beyond. And I hope that we're able to realize the ideas which Steve's put forward, which are marvelous. I've just had confirmation from a leading activist. Well, she's getting, like me, she's getting on a bit, but she has an art center right there in the harbor of Durban. That's Nisa Malanga. We call it the BAT Center, BAT Center, and she's agreed to host workers. She even said, how can I get in touch with dockers internationally and extend the invitation to a launch of photographs and histories of dock worker struggle in Durban. So there's a wide welcome, and we're looking forward to a really good discussion today.
Good evening, Steve. Good evening, Dave. Good evening, Ashley Karen. Comrades, let me start with the Auckland workers who just received up 14%. I think it's a great achievement, and I think all of us can learn from the comrade dock workers of Auckland, because from South Africa for a long time, when received actually 10%, it's been a struggle for all of the unions, whether COSATU, whether NACTU, or every other union, to achieve at least 10%. So for workers of Auckland to reach at 14%, I think all of us can learn something. I think everyone of us, should have something that would learn from those particular workers. But what is important is the unity of workers, because once workers are united, everything is possible. South Africa, in regard to the risk of transnet, 3 unions were SADAW, OSU, and us, RETUSA, were all together. Everything stands still actually for almost next to 14 days or so. But we've only, achieved 6%. But what is very important was that UNDU has sold out the strike. Because if it was not for UNDU selling out the struggle of workers, obviously, I think we're going to receive up to 10%. Everything was just still in all the harbors. Let me come to the issue of the 1973 strike commission that is going to take place in Durban on January. All of you are just welcome. We are talking to some other unions, NUMSA, because NUMSA was, at the time it was MAU, and that was actually doing us. We're still inviting people who are playing an important role, who have just retired, to come and join us. That strike, it happened at the height of apartheid. It happened at a time when black workers' lives were so cheap. Police were just moving with machines and so forth. But workers, despite all those challenges, they stood up. In fact, that 1973 strike, comrade, it was when it was finished, there was a VN commission that started, I think, in 1970, it will be in 1980, which then where the legislation in terms of workers was changed. The VN Commission for South Africa, black workers were listened to. Black workers were just given some of the rights, because at that point in time in Nigeria, black workers were not allowed to join trade unions. They were not allowed whatsoever to improve or to fight for the improvement of their working conditions. They were downtrodden. They were working like slaves and so forth. But that 1973, I think, opened up for the government for the first time to listen to what is the workers' issues. But we'll be talking more, comrades, in terms of what happened, what the VN Commission actually come up with, and so on. Legislation that's enacted, after that. As we're speaking right now, comrades, in the Constitution of South Africa, we are having a right to strike, which you don't find probably in most of the countries in Africa. I think we are just one country in South Africa where in the Constitution, there is a right entrenched says a worker's right to strike. We'll be talking about those particular issues. The second issue that we have just discussed with Dave and other comrades, I think there should be the exhibition, so that actually workers of the world can see what was really happening. Workers were just beaten. Workers, some of them actually disappeared. Some of them not been just found, up until actually to date. But it is great that we are having a democracy today, despite the fact that, not everything is hunky-dory. There's still a lot of challenges. As we speak right now, most of the state-owned enterprise companies are being sold. There's a serious privatization that is taking place. I think it will be important also to share with international workers in terms of how do we fight the issue of privatization. It is happening not in South Africa alone, but happening throughout the world. The thing that we have found in 1980s, 1990s, the international solidarity played a very important role in our struggle. And we all view that as of now, we still need that particular international solidarity. We still look to work together. We have to share some strategies of what has worked, for workers maybe in Britain, what has worked actually for workers in USA, what has worked actually workers in Europe, so that we can share those particular information. Because once we share those information and we also have this international solidarity, I think there's a lot that we can just achieve. Coming on to the issue of the Auckland workers, we were of the view that maybe today we're going to have them, into this meeting, so that understand their strategies, understand in terms of what have made them to achieve this gigantic kind of increase that we have never seen, I think, in many, many countries, in South Africa, whether in Africa, I think in many, many countries. But I think their strategies is going to assist us to understand their strategies, so that those strategies we can utilize also as well in South Africa when we're just fighting for the wages, because things are still very, very difficult. Most workers are still earning below what is called the bread line. Most of workers are still earning around 3,500, which is not going to assist even to buy groceries and so forth. So in South Africa, I used to say most of these workers are underemployed. So if we are at 3,500, it is not going to take you anywhere, given the fact that, in terms of tax, you are paying around 42%. In terms of unemployment, it's so high. In terms of food, everything, it's very expensive. Petrol, I think it has increased, I think, more than 6 times in this year. If it is decreasing, it is decreasing with the only boost and so forth. So things are very, very difficult. So we are still having a lot of workers who happen to be employed, earning very, very less to make even surviving and to make sense. Comrades, I want to thank this opportunity once again in terms of the support that you giving to us as workers in South Africa. We want you to continue to give this kind of support. We want to be part in the community as we use. We want to work with you. And I think it will be important when you come into South Africa, we'll take you to some other places. In fact, we but we are going to discuss you to take you into some of our communities, to understand, the kind of state of living of some of the people. Recently, we've got actually floods that have taken away a lot of properties, that has washed away, the little people have, more especially people staying actually in the checks, and some of the buildings that was just washed away, by the flood that has happened and so forth. In fact, I think it will be important maybe to visit those communities, because as trade union, we're not only operating in the workplace alone, but we are also living in communities. So I think we have to discuss this issue where workers will be visiting to commemorate the 1973 strike, the 50 years. That we also take to our communities to see the kind of life people are just living. And I think we'll appreciate to see things in as much as we are in a 28 years of democracy. It has not much improved. So maybe we have to do some nation as some of the people have been doing. Because government alone cannot, deal with those particular issues. We've seen some of the people making contribution to those needs. Because it's almost from July right now, some of the people, almost around 200 communities, are still living into the community hall and so forth. So it will be important actually for the trade unions to go there and see, how the people are living, the state of poverty, the state of unemployment, the dilapidating, condition of living actually to people, in our communities. So it's important that we go and just visit, and so that you when you go back, countries, you report of these particular kind of issues, because it's not about us. Because we've taken a decision as RETUSA to say it's not about only people who are just working, but we have to also look onto how we can also contribute and assist into our communities that we are living in. Because some of us, we are just fortunate because we've got actually this kind of environment, and few people are just working, but the majority of people, if you speak, around 15 million people unemployed in a population of plus minus 56 million. That's a lot, which is almost around 42% of employment in our country. It's so important. Let me just stop there, comrade. I was just making this kind of contribution, say maybe over and above, the commemoration that we're having around 1970 strike, and visiting the port and so forth. But as well, I'll appreciate if you can visit also our communities, to see their state of living.
Thank you, Comrade Dube. We do have Gennaro. I don't know if he wants to introduce himself. He may be working actually on the docks.
Comrades, I'm Gennaro Balltrip. I'm a rank and file member in ILWU Local 10. I'm also on the executive board. I am also on the board of trustees, and I am actually driving, so that's why I don't have the video on, and I won't be able to talk too much because I got to pay attention to the road because I'm trying to get to a destination. But I'm trying to chime in and tune in with you guys.
One of the things that is going on in South Africa now is called load sharing, where as a result of privatization and the collapse of the electrical system, they're not able to have regular electricity. So large numbers of workers and plants are not getting regular electricity, which is creating a tremendous crisis for the community. And even in California, there's concerns about a collapse of the electrical systems. And one of the things that we are planning to have is an international conference on the 1973 uprising in South Africa. And David has done slides, and he is of that struggle of photographs, which we're going to show in an exhibition. We're planning to have an exhibition. And also we're going to plan to videotape and audio tape it so workers around the world can learn the lessons of that struggle. One of the things about the ILWU is that in 1984, there was a work action by the dockers not to load or unload cargo from South Africa. And as a result of that, for 11 days, there was a federal court decision, and the police attacked the picket line. And it was a very important step in building direct labor solidarity. And I think one of the things that we have to, develop is direct labor action internationally. That is the solution to breaking the union busting that's going on globally. And I think the victory of the Liverpool dockers recently was in part because the ITF and IDC, other unions around the world, said they would support them. That is critical. And that's GM workers in the United States, whether GM workers in Mexico or China. Workers are connected all over the world. Yet we don't really have a real regular international action of workers to back each other up. And that is critical. Maybe, Comrade Dube, can you talk about the situation now on the docks as a result of the strike? Is the strike still going on, and what's happening with the conditions? And also, maybe you can talk about contract labor, temporary labor, because I know that as a result of deregulation in Europe, there was a fight against deregulation, contract labor. Is that an issue in the South African docks, temporary work and contract labor?
Thank you, Steve. In regard to the condition right now after the strike was terminated, everybody is back actually to work right now. But workers, I can say without any contradiction, that they are not happy at all. The big issue right now, the issue of 6%, in as much as workers are not happy in regard to the 6% that they have received or in terms of the contract that was signed. But the big issue is around the restructuring clause, which just given powers to management to say, soon after the strike, they can start as they wish the issue of transition. Let me just put actually Comrade onto the picture. Management of Transnet have started to issue what the voluntary severance packages to all workers, to management. This has affected mostly the operation, because some of the high-skilled workers, I'll just mention the train drivers, I'll mention the operators actually in the port, in Sportnet, in the train drivers, the train assistants, some managers, even senior managers took particular VSP. What they've realized after that VP from last year, August, was that most of the skilled workers have gone. So it means they have to just re-employ them on contract basis. So it shows you that, management in terms of their planning were not so good. In fact, they do not think very well, their plan in regard to the issue of the VSP. As now they've been given this right of restructuring, it means they can get rid of workers as much as they can. And you know that workers, the majority of workers are unskilled. So it means those workers are standing, a chance of being retrenched. We are currently having a privatization taking place. In the port of Durban, there is a place called Pier 2, which is very, very busy. They want to privatize that for 25 years. There's a port of Moha, which is in Eastern Cape. They want to also take that to the private companies for 25 years. In Sportnet, which is the rail system, they want actually to put, in fact, the contract has been given to Bidvest, which is a private company in South Africa. which is buying out, small companies and so forth, it will be taking the rail system. So that means in the first time, we might find, our port, might find the rail system being operated by the private companies. In as much as in our discussion with management, they've indicated there will be retrenchment. We know the story. We've been there in the more actually 8 years. Once you a private company, more so when this company is in 25%, obviously, in as much as they've promised that this private company is going to train people, retrain people, obviously there are workers who are going to be taken out on the basis that they don't meet the necessary skills that is required by this company. So that's the issue. We are working together with the unions like Ubuntu. We are working with unions, SATAU, but Ubuntu, we don't trust Ubuntu on the basis of what has just happened. We don't trust them whatsoever. So we don't think they are going to assist us anyhow in terms of this struggle, because currently they are the multi-union, meaning they can speak to management, they can sign whatever agreement they want to sign. Whether that agreement is on the negative effect to the workers, as we've seen the negotiation agreement, I don't think they care. I don't think they care whatsoever. So I think that's the thing that we are facing currently. Let's speak briefly onto the casual or contract workers. Yeah, I can tell you, if you speak around Transnet, in the port, there are about 7, if not 8, labor brokers who are just operating. The working conditions, comrades, are so bad. Those workers, they earn their salary on the basis of many vessels they've worked. I was disappointed, because there was information that we requested, and we found that information. To find that there was a worker nowadays who can earn 1,500, 1,700, which is, it's a money not even by grocery, let alone the issue of sport, let alone in terms of, supporting actually your kids to go to school or to go to university, let alone to deal with any basic services. So that's a kind of situation, comrade. Those are there. We believing as we're engaging women as RETUSA, because the plan that tried to make some of those workers and be employed by Transnet to be like a contract workers for Transnet, at least a wages that was going to be, as much as they were going to be small, but take workers somewhere. For those workers are still contract workers, are still working within the contracts that is operating the port. All the ports, whether you go into the port, 7 ports in South Africa, whether you go to Spornet, which is the rail system, you'll actually those workers. Whatever division of Transnet, you will find those workers. And what we are much afraid as a trade union is that we might find ourselves having those contract workers being majority and permanent workers being minority, because I think that's a plan of companies to reduce workers, more especially permanent. They're saying permanent workers are very expensive because they've got medical age, for these allowances, night shift allowances, and they've got pension. When you go to the contract workers, those workers, they only have those wages which are meager, as just indicated before that, some of them are earning around 1,500, 1,700. Those who are earning a little bit are earning around maybe 3,000. After deduction, then you can imagine that worker is left with next to nothing into his pocket to support his family. Let me come on to the issue of load sharing. We are having a serious problem, commerce. If our government listened very well, there was some research that was done to say the population in South Africa is increasing. That was around 2008. We should start, having more, companies that is going to generate electricity. Government did not listen. Right now, we are having from time to time load sharing. Companies are retrenching people. There's short time. As RETUSA right now, I can tell you, we are dealing with a lot of workers, a lot of companies who are just giving workers short time. We've experienced a lot of retrenchment of workers. While we are having this issue of load sharing, we are also having a problem that has experienced in the world, which was the issue of COVID-19. COVID-19 has taken out from employment more than 1.5 million. 1.5 million workers, were just retrenched as a result of COVID-19. So we are having, I will say, I'm not sure whether it's a several problems, issue of unemployment, issue of poverty, issue of inequality. Now we're having an issue of load sharing. Most of the companies are closing down. Small business are unable to operate. Most of them have just closed down. And we don't know when is this problem going to be fixed. In terms of the anticipation of government, they're saying we might be experiencing actually this load shedding for the next, 3 to 4 years. There are stations that has been built. There's a lot of corruption actually with ESCOM. There's a lot of problems that has been reported. There's a station in Kusile supposed to have been operated from last year. We're told that it's gonna be only operating around 2024. There's a private partnership that's been given to operate with Tom. Recently, I think the president has just announced, that is gonna issue, some sort of tenders to companies to work with ESCOM. So it's a whole lot of privatization, because once you involve those private companies, obviously there are going to be issue of unemployment, there's going to be retrenchment. These are the problems that we are just facing, comrade, from time to time. And the load shedding can tell you because in your home while you are still cooking, electricity is just off. Companies, while they are still operating, workers have to stand for 2 or 3 hours, not doing any production because of load shedding. So it's an issue we don't know when it's going to finish, because there's promise after promise, but there seems to be no improvement whatsoever in regard to the issue of shedding. So these are the issues that we are being confronted on day-to-day basis, not only workers, also the communities, even the businesses, they are just complaining from left, right, and center in regard to these issues, the loading, as I've just indicated. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, Comrade Dube. And also Jack Heyman, who was one of the founders of the fight in 1984 to have the boycott of South Africa, was involved in that and has also been involved in privatization.
So let me just talk a little bit about international solidarity. My introduction to real concrete international solidarity was the 1984 strike against the ship from South Africa. And what's important when workers go into a struggle like this is that they must be informed, they must be educated about what the issues are behind it. And so former brother Leo Robinson, for perhaps a year before the action, was giving classes on the conditions under apartheid for the majority Black population there. And so the membership of Local 10 was well informed. And Howard Keeler was doing research and found out that the Ned Lloyd Kimberly was coming into the port of San Francisco. And so he introduced a resolution to refuse to work the ship. And it was a combination of informing the membership and taking action at the precise time that sparked off this, what became a historic strike. Nelson Mandela, when he was freed from prison on Robben Island, made a tour, a world tour. He came to the Oakland Coliseum, and one of the first acknowledgments that he made was that it was the Longshore Union that sparked the anti-apartheid movement in the United States through that action. So that was my first introduction to international solidarity work. And then 12 years later, there was the Liverpool dock worker strike, and the president of the union, Brian McWilliams, who was the last socialist president that we had in the ILWU, we've been in a rightward trajectory since then. He designated me to go to Liverpool to bring solidarity greetings. And in fact, I hadn't been aware of that strike that was going on. Steve, in fact, told me about it. This was the beginning days of when we were getting involved with internet. And so on instructions from Howard Keeler, I went to Liverpool, and they had been isolated because the TUC, the trade union bureaucrats, were refusing to come to the aid of the Liverpool dock workers, because under Thatcher's newly promulgated laws, it was an illegal strike, and the union bureaucrats were adhering to that. And so they were isolated. So when I went to bring solidarity greetings from the Longshore Union on the west coast of America, they were thrilled. They lined up BBC and all the news media, which had been blacking out their struggle. And we in the ILWU became very involved in the Liverpool docker struggle. We brought them over, some of the dock workers stewards, to address rallies and union meetings in the Bay Area. And then that spread from the Bay Area up and down the coast to from Vancouver, Canada, down to the Mexican border. So it became an important struggle for the international working class. And then coming out of the Liverpool docker struggle, which was, by the way, it was defeated precisely because the trade union bureaucracy had isolated them, and they weren't able to take effective action, which essentially, if you're going to have an effective strike, you've got to be able to stop the scabs at the point of production. And they weren't able to do that because they couldn't get the mass support from the working class, from the trade unions in Britain. But what came after that, just a year later, there was a longshore or dock workers struggle in Charleston, South Carolina, which I became involved in. And these workers were fighting for a union contract. They had a union contract, but in the South, there's a thing called right to work, which means the employers don't need to have unions and they can do whatever they want. So the longshore workers in Charleston had a union, a union contract with this company, Nordana Lines, and Nordana wanted to go non-union because it's simply more profitable for them. So the longshore workers in Charleston put up picket lines. It's interesting because here we are in the 21st century. The Longshore Union on the East Coast is a different union and much more conservative than the West Coast Longshore Union. In fact, there's been a book written about a comparison between the two, and it's called Reds and Racketeers. We're the Reds on the West Coast, and the East Coast were the Racketeers. It's an interesting comparison. I don't have time to go into it now, but we came to the aid of the Charleston longshoremen when their own union was isolating them. John Bowers, president of the ILA at the time, did not want to support a strike by the Charleston longshoremen. And we joined in. We got other unions to support them, and the Charleston longshore struggle became a cause célèbre of the entire organized labor movement in the United States. And so that was a real success in this situation with international solidarity, because the important thing about the Liverpool dock worker, the struggle, is that it brought together the most militant, class-conscious trade unionists in the world. And so I contacted the Spanish Dock Workers Union because the ships that were being loaded by scabs in Charleston were going to Valencia, Spain. And I contacted the general coordinator of La Coordinadora, the Spanish trade union, and said, well, first of all, there was a new trade union international movement of International Dock Workers Council starting up. And I said to the president of La Coordinadora, who also happened to be the general coordinator of the IDC, the International Dock Workers Council, if you want to have the ILWU, the West Coast Longshore Union, join this new movement of dock workers, you have to show them the difference between the IDC and the International Transport Workers Federation, which is, I think it was 20 million transport workers around the world in a very bureaucratic, conservative federation. And so what they did, the La Coordinadora went up the gangway. Julian Garcia was the general coordinator. It spoke to the captain. He said, we're not going to unload this ship because it's not been loaded by union labor. It's unsafe. These scabs don't know how to load ships. And unless you get a union contract, get your ships loaded by union labor in the United States, we're not going to handle these ships. And the captain freaked out and immediately contacted Nordana headquarters. And within 48 hours, we had a union contract for the Charleston Longshore Union. That's how international solidarity works in the concrete. And so it's something that we need to apply today. So I don't want to take up too much of your time, but let me just conclude by saying I'm retired now. I'm not an active longshoreman, but I am still active in the class struggle. The Longshore Union is negotiating a contract. And really, one of the main problems is that the union bureaucracy is not informing the membership about what's happening in negotiations. And this is causing a real frustration. I don't know if Gennaro has spoken yet or Leith, but maybe some of the longshore participants here could speak a little bit about negotiations. But I have been down to the hall, talked to longshoremen, and there's a real frustration about not having the information. On top of that, prior to the contract being negotiated, the new contract or the old contract expired on July 1st. And prior to that, the union newspaper, almost every edition was filled with pictures of Democratic politicians, the head of the Department of Labor, Biden. And so in this attempt to look like statesmen of labor, they've bent over backwards to accommodate the Democratic Party, which is in power now. Now, they have no contract, but traditionally the Longshore Union had a position of no contract, no work. And that's been, that's another indication of how the union is becoming more conservative. They are working without a contract. And right now, they're not taking any kind of strike action because of the elections. They wanted the Democrats to get reelected, as though the Democrats were going to be the saviors of the Longshore Union. In fact, it was Obama and Biden, their administration in 2012, that helped break a strike by the Longshore Union up in the Northwest, an important grain struggle around the international conglomerates. They had an armed Coast Guard cutter escort a scab ship that was coming into the dock. And that was at the time of Occupy. And we were able to get Occupy to agree to join with us in 3 caravans, which would be converging on Longview, Washington. The Portland Labor Council voted to join that caravan, Seattle, and the San Francisco Longshore unions. And what happened in that militant struggle, because workers were actually occupying the grain facilities on the docks. That men and women, I don't know if anyone has seen Salt of the Earth. It's one of the classic labor films that was made during the McCarthy period in this country. But women took the place of men because there were injunctions against the men, the union. And so the women stepped up. And that's exactly what happened during this grain struggle, which was very militant. They actually sat across the railroad tracks and didn't allow the trains, the scab trains, to come to the port. Of course, the police broke it up with mace and arrested a number of the men and women in that struggle. But that's the role of the Democratic Party. We have 2 capitalist parties. We don't have one single mass working class party in this country. And that is key to having any kind of cohesive, militant working class struggle. We need to have our own party. And that's been lacking for a long, long time. I'm going to leave it at that because I think I'm taking up too much time here. But thank you all for allowing me to speak.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jack, because that's absolutely critical history of the ILWU and workers in the United States. Not only have they been telling the ILWU that they better not strike before the elections, but also the railroad workers have been told that they can't strike, and they're without a contract, and they're voting their contract down. So the trade union bureaucracy in the United States is saying we got to rely on the Democrats, and they'll help us out. And also, we have Gabriel Prawl, who's past president of ILWU Local 52, and is also president of the AFL Randolph Institute, and they've been fighting privatization as well and other struggles in Seattle. So I'm glad you could join us, Gabriel.
We're fighting right now because most of the focus is about the privatization and taking over at the ports. And here in Seattle, which I'm part of the Port of Seattle, I'm in New York at this point. But we had been dealing with the issue of billionaires, Steve Hansen trying to build hotels and stadium close to the ports, and that would eliminated jobs. We fought against that. We was able to defeat that, but no, presently we have the issue of the Coast Guard. this Coast Guard is trying to expand the footprint on the ports. So we got they are actually located between terminal Pier 36, and we got this terminal Pier 46, where we have a container. We lost a shipping company and a new outfit came in and doing work here, doing container work. Right now we don't have no ship, but we have floor works and gate works working there at this terminal, where the Coast Guard wants to take 2/3 of the term, expand the operation 2/3 of that terminal, which will eliminate that terminal from operating. I mean, that would just kill the work, you know, on many factors in here, because if you do a study on the Coast Guard, you can hardly find any person of color. You can, man, one of the lowest level of any military complex or military, whatever you talk about, the Army forces, the Army. I up to date, from the longest I've been around is member comes to the port or even walking by it while I'm driving by the port. That's so low, the amount of blacks. And when you compare it to Longshore work, which hire a lot of blacks, especially that community where we are.
Leith Khal, ILWU 19, Seattle, Washington. I wanted to step in and speak a little bit to try to finish what my coworker Gabriel Prawl, who's from the same port, same union, same port as I am, was talking about before his connection, because I work closely enough with Gabe. I think I know some of the struggle he was trying to outline that's going on up here in Seattle with the Coast Guard, and we have a scenario in Seattle that's definitely not identical, but very parallel to the struggle against the A's Stadium in Oakland, the attempt to privatize a big portion of the port of Oakland. We have 5 container terminals in Seattle, and 2 of them are in danger of being taken over completely by the Coast Guard. And there's no legitimate security reason that the Coast Guard needs. The stated reason is that we need to station icebreakers in Seattle to get to the North Pole and keep the North Pole open and free of ice in various seasons. Well, there's a lot of places that icebreakers could be stationed that are closer to the North Pole than Seattle, especially even within the Puget Sound, right? They could be stationed outside the Puget Sound, but even within the Puget Sound, there's closer places to the strait that gets you to the North Pole than Elliott Bay. So there's what's happening is that the Coast Guard as a public military institution is being used by some real estate interests who know that if they can get the container operations to cease on the terminals that are closest to downtown Seattle, that it will then be possible to line up a lot more hotel development, hotel and condo development capital to build up that portion of the town near the waterfront in the way that they want it built up, and to further gentrify it, push the last of the poor people out, including potentially Chinatown. It would be a major blow to Chinatown if they can get that capital lined up. Get the capital lined up as long as there's a noisy container terminal operation next door, but a quiet Coast Guard base, no problem. So there's that. And then another force that we've recently found out is pushing for the Coast Guard to take over these 2 terminals. Guess what? It's SSA, Stevedoring Services of America, which has two of the other 3 terminals under its control. And SSA right now has a monopoly on container terminals in Seattle, on operational container terminals in Seattle, because its two competitors, TTI, which handled Hanjin, which went bankrupt, and Eagle Marine Services, which moved out of Seattle, are gone. So SSA is actually pushing for the Coast Guard to take over the remaining terminals, because then it would know it had no competition, or no potential competition, no way of any other stevedoring company coming in and competing with it. So it could remain a stevedoring monopoly in Seattle. So this is a fight against gentrification and against the Coast Guard and against one of our major employers. And it's interesting because the Coast Guard, as Gabriel pointed out, it is the whitest demographically. It's the whitest branch of the American Armed Forces. It hires the least people of color of any branch of the military. But also, it was the branch of the military that the employers went to in the McCarthy period in the early 50s, when they passed the Magnuson screening program and the McCarran screening program to try to purge the maritime industry of militant trade unionists. And they did today the echo of what they're doing is called the TWIC card, the Patriot Act of 2001. But in the original form of that TWIC card and Patriot Act was the McCarran the McCarran and Magnuson screening programs, where they purged hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of militant trade unionists out of their unions. And in fact, they purged so many that they killed an entire union, the Marine Cooks and Stewards, a very militant maritime union that was working very closely with the ILWU, was destroyed by the Coast Guard purging people of the ability to go to their workplace and work on ships. And it just so happens, not coincidentally, that over 70% of the people purged by the Coast Guard from civilian jobs in the maritime industry from 1950 through 52 were African Americans. 70% of the people they purged were Black. So it was a huge blow to the earning power of the Black community in all the major coastal cities, including Seattle. And the ILWU fought back against it very hard, and there's a record of the ILWU fighting back against it in the Dispatcher newspaper's archives from 1950 through 52. If you look at the middle of 1950 all the way through 51 to the middle of 52, you'll see constant coverage of this issue, every single issue of the Dispatcher for that period. And ultimately, the screening program was ruled unconstitutional. But by the time it was ruled unconstitutional, much of the industrial damage had already been done. The purges had already taken place. The job loss had already taken place, and the Marine cooks and stewards had already been destroyed. It no longer exists. So the struggle against the Coast Guard and the racism that the Coast Guard represents and has been used to implement in the maritime industry is a very old struggle that militant trade unionists on the West Coast of the United States have been fighting for a long time. That struggle continues, and that is, I think, the end point that my brother Gabriel was getting at in terms of that strike. That also has a relationship to our contract struggle, because it's much harder, and our brothers in South Africa can tell me right or wrong about this, but it's much more difficult to negotiate a good contract for maritime labor in conditions where the waterfront is privatized and or militarized. Conditions are much more possible to organize in, much more possible to effectively organize for a good contract and secure a good contract when the waterfront is under municipal public sector jurisdiction. And so there's a reason that they put ballparks on waterfronts to try to privatize them. There's a reason why billionaires bid billions of dollars to try to buy up pieces of coastline. Here in Colombia, South Africa, Honduras, all over the world, there's the struggle between whether the waterfront is going to be a public sector or a privatized place is very much connected to whether waterfront workers are going to be allowed to build the type of organizations we need to build in order to secure good contracts. In that in that struggle, you generally find that the Democrats and the Republicans agree with one another that privatizing things is better than keeping them public, which goes back to what you all have been saying.
Well, thank you, Leith. And I think that one of the things that unites workers globally is a fight against privatization and the need to unify internationally. And that's going to be taken up at this conference in Durban, the fight against privatization of ports around the world. And one of the problems, the political problems, is this fight against privatization is an ideological fight against the Democrats, against the capitalist parties in South Africa, in the United States, and around the world.
To my locals' credit, we have put out that demand locally to local Democrats, and through it took a lot of work, but Maria Cantwell started out very much supportive of the Coast Guard, and she's come around to the ILWU's position. Not easily, though. Pressure had to be applied. It didn't automatically happen. But I think you're right, Steve. It needs to be more than just every local for itself, every local defend your own port. We need a coordinated coast-wide strategy to defend our ports against privatization, which means, yes, we do have to have those kind of conferences where we talk about what is the capitalist strategy, what is the privatizer strategy in every waterfront, and how are we going to beat it back in every port on this coast.
This is something we need to do. It has to happen, and it can bring workers together globally and unite all workers fighting privatization, not just in the ports, but in education and public services.
And thank you, Leith, for picking up where I left off. But the thing that really mind-boggling is that people are suffering and hurting in this country. And longshore work is one of the most good-paying jobs that to take people out of poverty, to make family have a better living, and the government is responsible to make sure that people can be able to live a better life in this country. But they work the opposite. They oppress and they instigate the whole purpose of building a country where there's more poverty than anywhere else. I mean, let's look at the fact that we send money for war machine all over the world, but you got people living in poverty here, homeless, and not able to feed a family, and then they make it an agenda to take away good jobs. So, I mean, it doesn't fit up. The economy goes up, the price of everything goes up, but the earning for people to live a better life goes down. I mean, this doesn't add up. But I'm going to be working here in Seattle, and I'm going to be working with my brother there, Leith, and trying to do some kind of thing like they're doing in Oakland. It's forming an alliance so we can take up on this fight, because we can sit back and watch this go on, because it's going to continue. And the fact that SSA wants to play that monopoly where they want to control the profits here in the Port of Seattle by eliminating other competition, I mean, that has to be stopped too, because it's not helping longshore job, and the future of longshore work is in danger right now. And as you say, it should be more publicized. It should be more engaged. People should be more engaged, and longshore workers need to be more engaged as well, not just a small group. Every longshore worker needs to be more engaged. We need to be making this real fight be exposed worldwide, not just here in Seattle, like it's been going on. Like, at least that we reach out to people, but it's not good enough. We need to go further. We need to reach out to the world, because this is something that's going on all around the world.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to see everybody is here from different places. This is really a beginning of building the things that we're talking about in terms of, fighting against privatization in New York. The mayor and the unions have collaborated to get rid of Medicare for people who are over 65 and are forcing people into privatized Medicare Advantage programs. The problem is a couple of things. The bureaucrats are just out to defend their own little piece of the pie, and therefore pit workers from their own particular industry or job title against everybody else and say, don't worry about anybody else, we need to get for ourselves. And that is the kiss of death. So internationalism, as Jack was explaining before, is really the way out. It's the only way out. Capitalism is an international system. We need to have internationalism of all workers. Otherwise, what's happening with capitalism is it's cannibalizing not only its own system. I mean, even if you read what's going on in Twitter, Elon Musk just laid off 50% of the workforce. The rest of the workforce hates him, and nobody really wants to do any work at Twitter anymore. And this is basically what's happening when all you're doing is seeking profit. And the problem is they get away with it, not just because of the Democratic Party, but they get away with it because of the union misleadership. And time and again, my union, I'm in the AFT, did the same thing. Don't do anything. We have to worry about the elections. We have to get somebody in to save us, workers, that workers can save ourselves. And it's the union bureaucrats that are keeping us, isolated. It's keeping us weak. It's keeping us disconnected, hostile to other workers. I mean, it's just, if it continues to go on, we're headed in a direction that's going to be world war. It's going to be fascism. We as workers have to band together internationally, because my interests are the same as the interests of the workers in South Africa and everywhere else in the world. And yet the unions say, my interest is my interest alone, and we can't worry about people in other places. So I put in the chat box the United Front Committee for a Labor Party, because Gilbert was, and absolutely correctly, is insisting that workers develop our own party. It's not just going to be the party that's going to I mean, workers obviously have to speak in our own name. We're going to have to organize mass strikes and international mass strikes, not just national ones, but international ones. But as a beginning, organizing a labor party where workers get a chance to speak in their own names, in our own names, is the beginning of the education that everybody is talking about at this point, of workers, not only nationally, but internationally. So if anybody is interested, I put in the chat box, and we have meetings every week about how to go about doing this. Please, everybody, come and join. But I have a question. From the last meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, the Longshore from South Africa and people in the Longshore from the United States, we're going to sort of begin to build some unity. And I'm just wondering what came out of that. Are people speaking to each other? Because frankly, I mean, as everybody on the call understands, it's the only way to go. We have to counterpose international workers' struggle to these limited bureaucrats who want to essentially keep their $400,000 or $500,000. And the president of my union of the AFT makes $500,000 a year, and who knows what else. And she's for the privatization of education, for charter schools, right? And she's ostensibly the head of a union of public workers, and she supports privatization and charterization of the schools. And so rather than allowing ourselves to be fighting with workers around the world and ultimately in war, workers of the world really need to unite, because we have nothing to lose but our chains.
Thank you, comrades. I think we have said quite a mouthful, but I think we're just all in agreement in terms of one issue only, the united front. Because I think throughout the world, we have just seen political parties that has been supported, by the workers, not working into the advantage of workers, but working with capitals, to destroy workers, to destroy the gains that over years were just benefited. So it's important. Now, in South Africa, Comrade, NUMSA have at some point to start, the Workers' Party. I think it's a discussion that is taking place in South Africa because the South African Communist Party, which is supposed to be the vanguard of the workers, I think they've just lowered that. They've just joined the government of the African National Congress. Similarly, the discussion out there in the community within political parties that the South African Communist Party is not an alternative actually for the workers, to lead the Workers' Party. I think this is a discussion that should be proceeding over years because I've heard comment actually from I think from UK, if I'm not mistaken, speaking about the Democratic Party, which has not assisted with this party, siding with capitalism, to destroy whatever the workers have just benefited. So it's clear we are just on our own as workers. It is for us as socialist comrades actually to look into an alternative, and the alternative it's one comrade. It is a political party that is going to be led by the workers, where workers are going to be the one that plan, that is going to be the one that say this is our destination. Because we've seen, in South Africa, as you all know, there's an alliance of, led by the ANC of COSATU, ACCP, But similarly, what has happened in terms of this party alliance is that, the African National Congress seem to be undermining other unity, which is the COSATU and the ACCP. Currently, I think if you've been just following news, the president was, chased, by the workers last year in the May Day. Currently, I think this year when it was a COSATU Congress in September, Comrade, who was the chairperson of the ANC, was stopped into addressing the Congress of the Workers, which was the Congress of South African Workers. It shows you that, things are not right even within the alliance. I think throughout the world, all whatever parties that workers have been supporting and so forth, when they are in party, I think this is one lesson that we should all learn. When they are, whether it's a Labour Party, whether it's a Democratic Party, whether it's a social democratic, party, once they are just in power, obviously they will just support, the capitalists are the one that, pump money to support these particular political parties. So it is very clear. Workers in the world unite. You've got nothing to lose. Our chains. I think that slogan, as it was said actually by Lenin, I think it should unite all of us to say we are on our own as workers. Privatization is all over the globe. It is causing havoc to workers. It is causing havoc, to companies, some of the companies that has been actually there for over 100 years and so forth. Because capitalist companies got only one interest, and one interest alone. Interest is to make profit and more profit at the expense of workers. So we should unite. This meeting, Comrade, actually should proceed discussing these issues. We should be very open. I think we're just learning from each other. In South Africa, Comrade, we have learned a lot. And as the international community, workers throughout the world, more especially workers from ILWU, played a very important role for the freedom of people of South Africa. A lot of, comrades and socialists, play a very important role for our freedom in 1994. We were of the view when we have this freedom and democracy in 1994, that it all going to be hunky-dory. And we have learned of late that as workers was in struggle, and the struggle is continuing. And Aluta Konina Congress.